Welcome to our webinar, Core Value Awards Part 2. Just so that everyone's aware, we will be taping or recording this this webinar. So for those of you that would like to get it afterwards, this also will be available to you. We're really pleased on behalf of IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA to welcome you to the webinar Core Value Awards Part 2. We have two fabulous speakers. John Lewis from IntelligentFutures talking about OurWascana, which was the IAP2 Member at Large Project of the Year Award, and Tyrone Reitman, Healthy Democracy Oregon, from the Oregon Citizens Initiative Review, which was the IAP2 USA Project of the Year Award. We are really pleased to be talking about our Core Value Awards. As you may be aware, IAP2 Canada just recently created some new awards, and this will be the very first year that IAP2 Canada will be holding their own Core Value Awards process, and this is now underway. So please don't hesitate to go to the IAP2 Canada website to find out more about how you can apply to be an IAP2 Canada Core Value Awards winner. And the IAP2 USA Core Value Awards will be starting soon. We expect to have them up and ready for everyone to apply to as of May of this year. So before we get going with today's webinar, I'm just going to ask Drew to step in and do a little bit of housekeeping. So over to you for a second, Drew.
Okay, just a couple of things to bring up here. One of them is that you will be able to ask questions. You'll see on your screens there that there is a sort of a hand icon. Doesn't look much like my hand, but you know, it is supposed to be a hand. When you click on that, we'll see it indicating there that you've raised your hand, and Amelia will be watching throughout, and she will be looking for a hand that's raised, and you know, if appropriate, she'll break in, or just wait until after the presentation is done, whatever seems appropriate for the flow of things, and call on you, and at that point we'll unmute your microphone, and then you can speak. We're going to keep all the microphones muted except for the mic being used by the presenter. That eliminates the feedback that can come. We found that if a mic is left open, it causes this kind of echo effect, and so that can be really distracting and can ruin things. So we're going to keep everything muted, and if you could please make sure that your mics are unmuted, then when we come to you, if you have a question and you want to speak, we'll unmute your mic from here. So we'll take control of all of that now. So please unmute your mics if you haven't already done so. There's another way of asking questions, and that is through our question box. And that's another box you can just type your question in. It can be read by Amelia, and then she can type the answer back to it, or she can read the question off. If you don't feel like asking it yourself, she can read the question off to our presenters at that time. As Amelia said, this is being recorded. We usually get this posted within 24 to 48 hours, usually faster than that. And it's for your professional development use, but because of the interest in the Core Values Awards, this one and last month's webinar are both up on the public section of the IAP2 websites. So feel free to have a look at that. There's also collateral material like PowerPoints and videos and so forth that you can look at as well. We'll have those linked on the IAP2 websites as well, and you'll be able to use that and let others know about it. Maybe generate the creative juices for your own particular Core Values Awards, your own particular public engagement projects. And if you're thinking of applying for a Core Values Award yourself, that's one way that you can look and see how the others did it. So with that, that's about it from me. I'm going to throw things back to Amelia now to get things started.
Thanks very much, Drew. So as I said, it's my very real pleasure on behalf of both IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA to welcome John and Tyrone to today's webinar. And we're going to start off with John. So John Lewis is the president and founder of IntelligentFutures. John's approach brings together elements of community engagement, strategic planning, effective communication, and capacity building to create meaningful conversations for the communities and organizations he works with. Projects that John has worked on have won awards from the Canadian Institute of Planners, the International Association for Public Participation, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Canadian Urban Institute, and the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association. John is the member of the Canadian Institute of Planners, is president of LEAD Canada, which is Leadership in Environment Development, and is a member of LEAD's international training team, and has also been an instructor at the University of Calgary, the University of Alberta, and Simon Fraser University. Please join me in welcoming John to the IAP2 Canada, IAP2 USA webinar on core values. John.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I hope everyone can see the screen now. All right, so thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about a project we did in 2012 called OurWascana, which was fortunate enough to win 2013 IAP2 award. We were asked to participate in this project to do community visioning for this place called Wascana Centre in Regina, Saskatchewan in Canada. So just to give you folks who might not be familiar with where Regina is a sense of where it is, Saskatchewan is in the yellow there, and Regina is the capital city in there. So it's about 200,000 people. It was founded in the late 1800s, and Wascana has played an important role in the development of the city over time. Wascana is known in large part as it's referred to in a lot of ways, in a lot of corners as Wascana Park, but it actually there's a lot more to it than just a park. It's actually the home to the provincial legislature, to the University of Regina, to the Technical College, the Saskatchewan Institute of Applied Science and Technology, the Provincial Royal Saskatchewan Museum, an art gallery, rehabilitation hospital, and numerous sports fields, and it goes on and on and on. So up at the top of this slide, you can see a legend of the extent of some of the things that are in Wascana. So it plays a really important role, not only in the city, but in the province as well. This is Wascana Centre in 1910. So this is just as the provincial legislature was getting built. So Regina was very small. It's still very flat. And so this is what it looked like just over 100 years ago. And this is what it looks like today. It's taken from the legislature as well, but you can see the difference over time. So what's been really interesting, or what was interesting in this project, is that other visioning projects we've been involved with, there is, especially when you're talking long term, so this was a 50-year time horizon, you get you know, sort of a why bother attitude with some folks. You know, what's the point? But when looking ahead at the future of Wascana, what you can do actually is very clearly see the value of vision. So you don't make that transition to what you see today without the long-term ambitious vision of some of the founders of the province and the city. So that was a really interesting context to be thinking about the future of this place that's really valued by the community. So just what this collage shows is just some of the historical development of Wascana, and really primarily the diversity of the place. It's known as a jewel within the city. There's a lot of open space, natural space, community gatherings, events, like I say, the legislature, important institutions. And so really what we tried to do when we were approaching this is to create a process that was worthy of this place. And so we took that challenge very seriously, because it is such a critical part of the city and the province. So in 2012, the Wascana Centre Authority was celebrating its 50th birthday. So coincidentally, the legislative building was built 100 years ago at that point. And so this 50-year anniversary was for the founding of the Wascana Centre Authority, which oversees the maintenance and development of Wascana Centre. In 50 years ago, it had done a sort of the modern master plan for Wascana Centre, which was, as coincidence would have it, was done by Minoru Yamasaki, who was the architect of the World Trade Centers in New York City. So in that sort of point of celebration and reflection, they also wanted to take a breathing point and say, what does the next 50 years look like? And so that's where we were brought into the process. Oops. So our community engagement and visioning process was part of a broader comprehensive review plan. So Wascana Centre Authority, in concert with the 3 partner organizations that fund Wascana Centre, which is the provincial government of Saskatchewan, the City of Regina, and the University of Regina, took on this comprehensive review which looked at not only our piece, which was engaging the community for 50 years into the future, but also taking an assessment of where Wascana Centre was at. So they did assessments of the physical infrastructure, of the landscape, and really started to look to merge those of where we're at now and where we want to go, and then included in that was sort of a governance review as well. So in mapping the process, so some of these slides that you'll see here, the up top it sort of talks about how we approached it, and below is a reference to the core values of IAP2. In our processes, we tend to think about the task at hand, our approach to it, and then reflect on the values as we go through. And certainly, you know, and even applying for the award, it was interesting to you know, cross-reference to double-check that we in fact were in alignment with those core values. And so mapping the processes, the folks on the webinar will know that there's no shortage of time that needs to go into a process up front in order to make it successful once you go live. So we spent a tremendous amount of time planning the process, mapping it out. And how that worked for us was we were tasked with, you know, creating, designing that process, but the Wascana Centre Authority Strategic Planning Committee, which had representatives from the authority itself, those 3 partner organizations, and other members in the community, really provided the community knowledge and insight and context to understand who the stakeholders were that we needed to engage, understanding potential risks, making sure that what we did had relevance for the community. And I have to say, it was probably the most constructive relationship that I've ever worked in terms of this strategic planning committee really was well connected in the community, but they understood that their role was oversight and kind of strategic direction, and trusted us to really go execute in creative and interesting ways. And it was a really, really fun project to work on from that perspective. When we go into our projects in community engagement, I often frame things in terms of what I call strategic ignorance. And this was really, really important for Wascana. There's so many viewpoints on Wascana and so many perspectives. And anytime we go into a project, we want to try and park any assumptions we might have at the door so we can really authentically listen to folks. And that was really important for this project because I'm actually from Regina. I was born and raised there. This is a picture of my wedding day. We got married in Wascana itself. Every Father's Day, our family would have picnics there, and so I have a very intimate connection to this place. So it was especially important for me to be strategically ignorant and park my assumptions and my thoughts for the future of the place in order to effectively listen to the community. So in planning our process, the overarching thing we kept coming back to was creating multiple entry points into the conversation. So knowing that this is a beloved part of the city and province, you know, we broke folks into stakeholder groups for sure, but it's a community-wide treasure. So how do we create so many entry points into the conversation that there's as many voices can be heard as possible? So this graphic just kind of shows a variety of those techniques, and I'll talk about some of them. Some are digital, some are workshops, some are in place. Just an interesting failure, absolute failure, was our use of texting. So we spent a decent amount of budget advertising in the busiest bus routes in the city in order to, you know, if you're on your way to work and you're on your phone anyways, you may as well text in some answers and share your thoughts. And I believe we got, in the span of 4 to 6 weeks, I believe we got 3 responses via text. So it's one of those where you experiment and you try things and you learn and reflect and adapt. So we haven't used texting very heavily in projects subsequently. So we had 3 questions that we structured our process around. Looking ahead 50 years, we wanted to make sure that they were open questions using the appreciative inquiry approach. And so we started with, what do you love about Wascana Center? So with such a rich history and place in the community, we wanted to make sure to spend some time and attention understanding what's working and why the community loves this place. I think oftentimes processes kind of get ahead of themselves, get maybe a little too self-important, and just think of the future and ignore what's great about the past and the present of a place. So we wanted to avoid that pitfall. The next is we want to talk about what changes would you like to see. So you know, you'll notice in the language that we're asking what changes, so that gets people to solutions and ideas as opposed to just complaining. So a different version of that question could be, what don't you like about Wascana Center? We get to that, but we also ask people for ideas and solutions. And then finally, kind of pushing people to extend their frame of perspective. What are your hopes and dreams for Wascana Center in the next 50 years? That was our specific challenge, but we also wanted to get the community's thoughts on that. So this process is really about place. It's a pretty unique place, and we wanted to make sure to recognize that and design our process to reflect that. So one of the key techniques we use is what we call our sounding boards. So these were installations that we built specifically for the project, and provided the community with information about the project and an opportunity to, as you see on those colored sort of post-it notes, to share their thoughts. So the idea again here is we provide people with multiple entry points and conversely eliminating barriers. So if you're in Wascana Center and you come across this, we had cups with pens. There is literally no barrier for you to participate. And the other thing is, it is about place, so you're in that place specifically. So your responses are more, I guess, real, less detached, less academic, because you're there reflecting, experiencing that place as you go. So these were in, yes, Amelia?
So Tyrone, just a quick question. So how many of these were around? And were there any security issues with this? And did a lot of people take advantage of this opportunity?
Yeah, I'll get to some of the numbers and the locations a little in a few slides here, but there was a question about security, and it wasn't so much security as maintenance. These were really well constructed. They always had an anchor point, so they were safe, but we made sure to go morning and night to take away any sort of unconstructive feedback, make sure the pens were stocked, all those kinds of things. And it does require more maintenance than, say, running just 2 workshops. But over the course of 8 weeks, we had 2 of these at any given time, and we rotated them every week. So over the course of 8 weeks, they were in 16 different locations, which is really important because Wascana Center is over 3 times the size of Central Park. So it's big. So we need to make sure to go to different places where there's different hubs of activity. And so one of the advantages with our sounding boards was that it was day or night. You could provide response. So again, anytime we think of workshops, open houses, those are time sensitive, and if you're busy, you don't know about it, you got to take your kid to hockey practice, you're going to miss that. And so as long as you're in the space and you see it, you have an opportunity to share your thoughts. And what it does is you get some surprising and inspirational kinds of responses, like the one you see here. And there is, I guess, one of the realities, some might frame it as a risk, is that you get, because there's no, you can walk by and be a smartass and provide some stuff that's not so constructive, but you also get just some funny things, like, what are your hopes for the next 50 years? A raccoon-themed musical called Jazz Paws. So harmless, doesn't take a lot of effort to take that down and replace it with a blank one, so someone can provide some more constructive feedback. But certainly, you know, those kinds of things are fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things that we spent quite a bit of time on was the graphic design element of our process. So one of my team members, Jeff, is a really talented graphic designer. So right from the outset, we said, okay, what's the OurWascana Center brand? So we want to, it's really strong in the community. So how do we just sort of translate that, talk about a new process, branded it as OurWascana to reflect that sense of ownership, and really use that sort of brand standard as a way of increasing knowledge about the process and recognition as we went through it. So related to that, we wanted to build learning into the process, and where we could, surprise and interest people. So people are busy, lots of distractions, and so when you're talking about the next 50 years, there's not a lot of sense of urgency. So we want to kind of surprise people and get them to learn more about the process and generate interest, which aligns again with some of the core values. So this is one example. We created an infographic that was on those sounding boards that gives people a real sense of the diversity and scale of OurWascana Center. So we intentionally sort of went in different sectors. So on the second level with the animals there, if you were more of a naturalist, you might know some of those facts about the different species, but you might not know that over 1,200 people live in OurWascana Center at the rehabilitation hospital, or the number of buildings there are, and those kinds of things. So again, just increasing knowledge and thereby ownership and thereby participation in the process.
So John, just a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get any feedback on the graphic? Did people like it? Did it resonate? Is it something that you would recommend to others that they use in their process?
Yeah, we didn't hear anything. It wasn't even I like it. People loved it. And it was, again, one of the things that we do in our practice is try and take as much information, distill it, but also make it interesting. And so this, through our color scheme and brand, it was a way of doing that. And there's heard lots of comments about the visual nature of it, the level of surprise that you would get with the diversity of information there. So it certainly has paid off for us in this project and lots of others as well. So one of the things we tried to do in sort of the learning component and build knowledge is we did a 50 Things About OurWascana Twitter campaign, both as we were just launching the project. So every day for 50 days, we would release things like you see here, tweets like you see, that shared some information that you might not know about OurWascana, generate that interest. And what that did was it created a good, learning in the process for sure, created a good buzz for the project, and then it actually created an interesting problem for us, because we ended up, our project Twitter feed had more followers than OurWascana Center Authority itself by the end of the project. So that was something that was kind of unique for us, but certainly a good problem to have. And in terms of the learning and surprise, here are two other examples. So when the Canada Day festivities, so for our American friends, or our version of the 4th of July was happening, we created a series of stencils and used spray chalk to create sort of a learning timeline about the evolution of OurWascana Center. So you can see the first one here. Well, that's not the first one. It's one of them. 1912, the legislature opened. And just off in the distance to the right of the gentleman in the yellow T-shirt, there's the next one. So you could walk along a path and learn about the path of OurWascana itself, and that concluded in our sounding board. So you're generating interest and surprising people and then asking them what they think. On the right was, we had a series of stakeholder-specific workshops, so partners, organizations that were in OurWascana, sports groups, and instead of having sort of the typical workshop flip chart kind of thing, one of our exercises was asking these diverse stakeholders to talk to each other and come up with the front page of the local paper in 50 years' time. And what do you come up with? And so, it surprised a lot of folks. We had some, fairly senior people that were at these, and it wasn't their sort of typical process. And you can see this group came up with a holographic heritage display that was in front of the legislative buildings. They think that was something that might be there in 50 years' time. So again, surprise people and have some fun, and there's nothing wrong with integrating that into a process. Transparency is something that's, of course, everyone here is familiar with and values, and we really wanted to close the loop as much as we could, but in as creative ways as possible. So For example, when we finished our first phase of engagement, we wanted to share what we heard from the community. So, the word cloud tool, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, we wanted to use that because I think it's a very effective tool, but then let's take it to the next level to make it visually interesting and also keep reflecting that idea of place. So we created this word cloud, for example, in the shape of OurWascana Center itself to give people a sense of what was heard. We created a different kind of infographic that was just about the process itself. And again, trying to close that loop to say thank you to the city and the province for all your feedback. So this gives a sense of the level of responses we got. You can clearly see where the feedback came from. So obviously those in-place sounding boards were a really important part of our process. And again, people can just sort of see that there's a validity and an honoring of the conversation, because I think in a lot of processes that loop isn't closed. So you might put something on or fill out a sounding board, go to a workshop, what have you, and then it just sort of vanishes and you don't know what happened.
So John?
Yes.
I'm just going to interrupt for just a second. I want to remind everybody that's on today's webinar that they can send me questions or they can raise their hands. Just as we're moving forward with these presentations, just so that as I'm doing right now, I can interrupt, I can interrupt John or I can interrupt Tyrone, just to make sure that we are getting questions answered as well. So please don't hesitate to send them to me so that we can make sure that your questions are answered. Sorry, John, please continue.
No problem. And so this was the second piece of this sort of process infographic. So again, it's about place. We were in that place quite extensively. So this visually shows where we were over the course of our 10 weeks and illustrates where the sounding boards moved to. We had an indoor display that rotated throughout the city, what community events we attended, all those kinds of things. And then so I'll close here. I'll just want to give folks a fairly quick overview of what we were up to. Again, reflecting back on the fact that it was a visioning process that was in a place that demonstrated the value of vision in a very tangible way. And this is a quote from the first premier of the province of Saskatchewan about not building just for today, but for the population of the future. And some of his ideals and some of his founding colleagues helped make OurWascana Center the greatly treasured place it is today, and the community certainly was really enthusiastic, and we had a great conversation about the future of OurWascana Center in this process. So I think so far in my career, this is probably the favorite one I've worked on. It was really fascinating, great people to work with, my hometown, and I was fortunate enough to be recognized by IAP2. So with that, thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Yeah. So John, you asked and you will receive. You're going to get a number of questions. So I'm going to throw quite a few of them at you in the next little while. So I hope you're ready to take this. The first one is, how did the media and your decision makers respond to it? So that's the first question. The next question is, how did you record those 8,000 ideas and report back to your customers? So I'll give you those three first, and then I'll come back with one more in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. So the first about media, we were very intentional about connecting with the media, especially at the outset, to generate that interest. So we managed to get coverage. We had sort of a dual launch on our opening day. The first was a media event, so we had the local paper, radio station, TV, and we got good coverage on all of those. One of the key things with media that we did was we went, Bernadette McIntyre, the CEO of OurWascana Center Authority, and myself met with the editorial board of the Leader Post, the local newspaper, and we walked them through what we were intending to do and why we were intending to do it. And we actually ended up getting a really thoughtful editorial piece that talked about the value of OurWascana itself, really encouraged people to get involved, and sort of gave kudos to OurWascana Center and our firm in terms of the open approach. And that's one thing where I'm sure folks that are on the webinar have been in contexts where people they were working for or other stakeholders were really trying to steer a process in a particular direction. But this Wascana Center Authority and the Strategic Planning Committee was completely open, and they just sat and waited. They waited and listened, and so the editorial board actually saw that, and they kept asking, what's the story, what's the angle in terms of where do you want to steer it? And then by the 5th or 6th time, in an hour and a half discussion, which is pretty remarkable for to sit with some newspaper folks for that long, they understood that we were actually just here to listen and would reflect on that. So that combined with the social media, I think, generated a really healthy amount of interest. With the how did you record it all and everything, this relied heavily on my team member Jeff, who was interning for me at that point. He's now an employee at IntelligentFutures, and just a lot of data entry. That's sort of another consideration, let's say, with the sounding boards, because if you're getting something on a website, you can manipulate that digitally right away, but you have to physically enter all those little Post-it notes, and that does take a heck of a lot of time. And Jeff did a phenomenal job, and so we used the In Vivo tool to start to discover themes and connections between them, and we had a lot of good sort of iterative conversations with the Strategic Planning Committee about what we were hearing, what it meant, linking it to more in-depth conversations with the stakeholder groups that I mentioned, and sort of evolving the discussion and process from there. But certainly that is one consideration, let's say, with those sounding boards, is the amount of data entry and maintenance overall that it takes. But again, I think if your intention is, those are small obstacles, if your intention is to get as many people involved, and particularly when it's sort of about a specific place, I think that kind of methodology is important.
So thanks, John. We have one more question, but I need to get on to Tyrone fairly quickly. So if you could be quick in responding to this one, that would be terrific. So it's a question from Anne. He said, perhaps I missed this at the beginning, but can we have a reminder? You're part of a consulting firm, and you're from where? And then she's wanting to know, how many weeks was this from start to finish? And do you have any sense of how many people were involved, both unique visits and also duplicates? And then who paid for this, and how much was it?
All right, Tyrone, I'm going to get through this quickly so I can get to you. All right, so what was the question? My firm, IntelligentFutures, we've been around for about 6 years. We're based in Calgary, Alberta, which is just the next province to the west of Saskatchewan, where Wascana is. We were brought in, we were hired by Wascana Center Authority. The Strategic Planning Committee specifically made the decision after a competitive bid process. The comprehensive review process itself was about an $800,000 project, and so we were a piece of that. Wascana Center Authority foot the bill for the entirety of that project, and Wascana Center Authority itself is funded by the province of Saskatchewan, the city of Regina, and the University of Regina. So those are all the partners that are involved in terms of funding the organization itself, which then funded our work. Did I catch everything that was in there? Oh, the number of participants we had and the length of time. It's essentially 10 weeks of active engagement from early May through to early October, and so there was analysis and sort of discussion and reflection points built within that. But 10 weeks of active time, and we heard from over 3,300 people, and within that there was probably a couple of hundred repeats with different participants in workshops and those kinds of things.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you for quickly responding to that. And Anne, thank you so much for the question. As I said to everyone, please don't hesitate to send us those questions, and we'll do our very best to make sure that we can respond to them. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Tyrone Reitman. Tyrone grew up in Silverton, Oregon. His background is in political reform work, advocating for increased transparency and accountability in government and politics. Tyrone has also worked for and volunteered with a number of ballot initiative campaigns, acquiring a first-hand understanding of Oregon's initiative process. Tyrone graduated with a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Oregon. His studies focused on political reform and decision-making in volunteer-based organizations. In his time off, he enjoys spending time with his wife and son, rock climbing around Oregon, and barbecuing for his friends. And he is also an avid and award-winning home brewer. Tyrone, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the webinar.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Is my screen up for everybody to see?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Well, I could talk at length about homebrewing, but I will instead talk about my work with the Citizens Initiative Review, which is why we're all here. So I'm the Executive Director of Healthy Democracy. We're based in Oregon. I'm also the co-founder. I founded this organization in 2007 with a colleague of mine from graduate school, and our sole focus from that point forward has been to develop a method for having the public evaluate statewide ballot measures, ballot propositions, in order to inform the public at election time. So we engage the public to inform the public around highly controversial issues on the ballot per up-down vote. So with this presentation, I'm going to give just a brief history of why we're doing this work, talk a bit about how the Citizens Initiative Review works, and then touch briefly on the evaluations that have taken place of our work and its impact on voters. So I'll just start with, in the U.S., almost half of the states in the U.S. have some degree of direct democracy, so direct lawmaking on the ballot, whether that's changing state constitutions or passing laws directly on election day. Oregon started this whole trend by and large in 1902. We, back in the day, adopted the Swiss model of direct democracy, and it's really flourished from there. You can see on the map it's mostly a Western phenomenon. I know it's certainly used around the world in varying degrees, and it's something that's a major driver of public policy, primarily in Western states in the U.S. So to put ballot measures in perspective before we get to the CIR, I'll just touch on the highlights. It's a big money process. Millions upon millions are spent in Oregon. We've seen roughly $100 million spent in a 10-year cycle. It's increasing since 2010. That's a drop in the bucket compared to states like California, where you can see upwards of $500 million being spent in any given election cycle. And it's big money because these are big issues that are on the ballot. We're talking about issues of taxation, land use, campaign reform, major social policies. And there's also big business behind it. You have all that money being spent, and you have a whole cadre of consultants in all these different states spending that money to put hot issues on the ballot for up and down vote. So, we know all that, and we know at the same time that direct democracy, as practiced in the Western U.S. at least, is widely supported. It's often seen as being in the democratic DNA of Western states, and it's something that voters, by and large, like as it is. So surveys over the last 10 years have generally shown that roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of voters say, I love direct democracy, I don't want it going anywhere. However, at the same time, we know that even if voters are saying that they're satisfied with their right to have direct democracy, roughly the same percentages will say, I'm also really confused about the measures that come up on the ballot and what the long-term impacts will be. And I do the best I can with the information I currently have and still vote. So you have a system where a lot of money is being spent on advertising hot political issues, where the people making the decisions themselves, the public, are saying, I'm often confused, and I still feel obligated to vote. And that's basically how the system works now. So we're passing major pieces. Go ahead.
So just a quick question. Can you explain to us how this is similar to public participation, community engagement. So how this relates to the core value awards as well, and why this is important?
Yeah, I definitely can. So I'll touch on how the CIR, the Citizens Initiative Review, changes the dynamics in providing information to the public when it comes time to vote on ballot measure elections. And that's generally the intersection that we've looked at. Direct democracy in and of itself, I think in a cut and dry sort of way, empowers the public to at least make those decisions. So they are, voters are the decision makers in this case, not elected representatives. And what we're trying to do is make a more informed vote, essentially, at election time. And when we get back to the beginning, or the question that we asked ourselves back in 2007 when we were striving for an answer to how do you provide information to the public in a way that they'll want to hear, the question was essentially how in an advertising-rich, fact-poor, high-stakes environment do you actually do that? How do you give voters information that they want and can use at election time? And our response was essentially put voters in charge of creating that information in a legitimate, deliberative way, and then make sure you can figure out how to distribute it to all voters across the state. And the reform, of course, that we developed is called the Citizens Initiative Review. And what we essentially do, for those of you familiar with the citizen jury method of public deliberation, is we convene a randomly selected, demographically balanced small group of the public and provide them with enough time and resources to deliberate and evaluate a measure, and then they summarize in their own words what that measure will or won't do and what the key facts are that they feel every voter should know. And it takes essentially, it's a three-step process, the first of which is we convene that random sample. We send out a mailing statewide to 10,000 voters. We bring in 24 respondents that say, I can participate. We make them demographically balanced. And then we bring the campaigns and experts to them over the course of 5 days so they can deliberate, identify what the issues are, and ask questions. And then that group of 24 voters writes, in their own words, the key facts for the measure and key arguments that is then published in Oregon in our statewide voters guide, which is we knew was widely used when we started this project. And it goes out to every voting household across the state. And so in essence, the 4 steps are we bring that sample together. We give them a week to deliberate. They write a statement based on their findings, and then that's published as an official publication to the state. And you can see it's kind of tough to see on the screenshot, but our voters pamphlet is generally pretty big in Oregon. It's roughly 100 pages, and for each Citizens Initiative Review, a prominent page is put in there we call the Citizen Statement that's sent out to voters across the state.
So Tyrone,
go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question. The people that were selected, were you trying to get a balanced mix? So some people for something and some people for against something and some people in the middle? Or how were these people selected? And did they know the information before they came into the room?
Great questions. I'll touch on that in the next 2 slides. So the first step that we take is we pull a pure random sample from the statewide voter registration list. And we send out 10,000 pieces of mail basically saying, here's this opportunity for public service if you'd like to participate, and a request to fill out some basic demographic information. We also include at that step a screening mechanism to say these are the measures that are potentially going to be under review, because we don't disclose what measure will be reviewed at this stage because we want to prevent bias from those people that are responding. But we do ask, of those measures that are going to be on the ballot, which do you have a direct conflict of interest with, and which can you not keep an open, objective mind about if you were selected to participate? And that's essentially the extent of our screening at that stage. So we don't balance the panel in terms of views on the issue. Instead, we balance the panel, as you can see, based upon demographics. So we look for 7 key demographics that if you squish the electorate of the state down to 24 people, we use targets to identify what this panel would look like if it was squished down to 24 based on these 7 demographics. So we have balance by gender, age, ethnicity, party registration, likely and unlikely voters, and so on. Because what we want to do at the end of the day is have a panel that is both legitimate based upon its perspective. You want to have a diversity of views in the room, but also politically legitimate, and they can be trustworthy to the public, because ultimately this group is going to be conveying a unique source of information to the public when they go to vote. So that's kind of the extent of our screening mechanisms that we use, and we get people in the room that are balanced on these 7 demographics. And then essentially they deliberate for roughly 5 days, and we put them in a venue where they have professional facilitation, they have the campaigns sending their own advocates there, and policy experts on tap in case they have questions. And over the course of those 5 days, this group first identifies as a whole what the key facts are they can all generally agree to. And once they've established what those facts are, they then assess and evaluate, what are the most important arguments and reasons for voters to support or oppose this issue. And they construct all of that information as a group. And what we produce ends up being a really high-quality statement in the voter's guide that we've seen is widely used by the public. And so getting kind of back to IAP2's core values and why we applied, and I think why we were awarded with the U.S. award. As I mentioned, direct democracy is really based on the belief that those affected by the decision have the right to be involved in the decision-making process, and the public, is ultimately the decider in terms of how direct democracy is designed to function. What we identified back in '07 was the real clear gap between how direct democracy works and what voters are saying they need to feel confident when they go to vote. And that informational gap, for lack of a better term, is what the Citizens Initiative Review is meant to fill. And by facilitating the involvement, basically, of those affected to ensure that the decision makers, in this case the voting public, has the information they need. And so there's a lot of alignment both between direct democracy and the Citizens Initiative Review, as you can see some of the IAP2 core values, essentially.
So, Tyrone, just a quick question. I mean, there was 24 people that were able to participate in this process. Was there any pushback that there should have been other opportunities, other stakeholder meetings, or open houses, or anything to allow more people? Because I know some people suggest that 24 is pretty limited to represent the entire state. So was there any pushback, or were people comfortable that these 24 individuals were representing their thoughts and concerns?
That's a great question. So by and large, the public, what we've seen through all the research that's been done, is very comfortable with this model. So it's kind of akin to the way legislative hearings work, where you have a small body of the public essentially weighing the pros and cons of an issue to inform a decision. And our goal is to keep this group small enough so they can deliberate, because at the core of the CIR, it's a highly deliberative process that is subject to issues of scale. So we don't aim to be representative in the strict scientific sense. What we're trying to do is really reflect, as best you can in a small group, demographic diversity of the public body that's making the decision. In this case, it's a statewide voting electorate. So there hasn't really been pushback around this idea. What there's been requests for is greater distribution of the results and opening up what's a highly information-rich process to get more information out of it to the public, and that's something we're working on in terms of convening town halls and forums across the state once the reviews are done, but not preceding it. But it's a great question.
So just another quick question following up on that was about how did the media perceive this? Because this is obviously meant to have a fairly significant influence on voting in the future. So how does the media perceive this? And perhaps as well, how do the decision makers perceive this?
Yeah, great question. So the media has been largely supportive of this. We've had editorial support from most of the major papers in the state of Oregon. Have started to expand out of state as well. And I think that's by and large because of the just amount of conflicting information that campaigns put out. So the media, I think, has looked at this as a real good opportunity to elevate the public debate, elevate the discourse around ballot measure elections. That's a little bit different from lawmakers, and our elected representatives who are, by and large, very supportive of this. We've had a number of bipartisan bills passed over the last few years to get this to a place in Oregon where it's established in state law. And I think that's by and large due to the fact that ballot measure elections really are drivers of state policy. So, if you have elected representatives elected to do a job and they feel hamstrung by, potentially previous decisions that have been made at the ballot by the public, they want to see more thoughtful discussion before laws are passed. So I think it's based on that premise that we've had a lot of success in Oregon. And so I'll just, to touch on that point too, I'll bring all these points up on the slide here. This has been a journey for the last 7 years that started with proving the concept. We took a really incremental approach to this in Oregon. The first thing we did was float the idea with lawmakers and say, here's our idea, what do you think? And feedback generally was that, folks thought it was a good idea but didn't believe that it could actually work to bring together randomly selected members of the public and debate complex policy. And so in 2008, we ran a test and proved that you could. In 2009, based on the strength of our work back then, a bill was passed to officially test this and put the results in the voter's guide, which we did in 2010 by running a couple of CIRs and having that statement in the voter's guide go out. We had the good fortune of having a research team funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation to evaluate it and answer the question of, if voters have this new resource, will it actually make a difference? And it turned out that it made a big difference for a lot of folks. Roughly 40% of the electorate used this. It could demonstrate that people were gaining fact-based knowledge about these complex issues. And based on the strength of that test, in 2011, the Oregon legislature made this permanent as part of our election process, which is a national first. Nobody's done this before, and that's when it happened. So from that point forward, we started to think about how to expand this work. We've had some pretty tremendous support from some great foundations to help us think through how to replicate the CIR in other Western states where all the dynamics are basically the same, and really scale up. And so we've been working on that for the last couple of years. And in the midst of that, had the great fortune of winning the IAP2 Project of the Year Awards in 2013. And so we sit here in 2014 looking out at a whole wide array of projects, trying to replicate in a couple other Western states and develop a leaner, less expensive version of the CIR we're calling CIR 2.0. And we're doing all of this because our work has been evaluated at length over the last two election cycles to evaluate whether or not it's actually a deliberative process, if it's getting out to voters, and ultimately if it's influential. Does it do more than just cue voters, but does it actually inform voters? And the very, very short answer to this is essentially yes. We've had research done in 2008, 2010, 2012, funded by some very notable names in the philanthropic world, and we know that the process is analytically rigorous, very deliberative and fair, and we also know that it's increasingly visible within Oregon. It's 2012, roughly half of the electorate saw the information in the voter's guide, roughly 2/3 used it, and we know it had an impact all the way across the political spectrum, left, right, and center, young and old. And that impact was to increase knowledge based on the quality of the work that came out of a deliberative process. And that last point has essentially been the goal and the journey for the last 7 years, is trying to prove, can good deliberative process inform voting at the end of the day? And, we're very fortunate to be in a position to be able to say, yes, it actually can. So just before I get to my last slide, so in terms of what's next for Healthy Democracy and the Citizens Initiative Review, we're continuing our work here in Oregon to solidify things. It's always tricky to work in a legislative context, and we're doing something that, to my knowledge, nobody's done before, so kind of charting new territory. And at the same time, we're trying to scale out to replicate in other states, which presents a whole host of really compelling challenges as we grow. And we're also working to build on this model and develop different types of CIRs for different applications, whether it's local ballot measures, which there are literally thousands in the U.S., and other challenging policy questions. So that was a lot of ground to cover, but I really appreciate being here, and thank you for listening. And I'm also extremely appreciative of the support of IAP2 in this 7-year journey.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. There is a very long question, and it sort of came at the beginning of your presentation, so you may have responded to some of it. So to the individual that sent the question, my apologies if I might skip parts of your original question, but I think this is still relevant, Tyrone. Do you have data broken down by demographics, including race, SES, home language, etc., on how this process has affected who is and isn't voting, and how comfortable they are with this process? How informed do they feel prior to voting, and how many vote on these topics versus just saying, well, I like this and I like that? So you've certainly talked about the influence that your public engagement process has had on the broader voting, but maybe to target a little to some of the other groups, if you have that information.
Yeah, I have some of that information. That's a great question, though. So what we know so far, so there were major studies done in 2010 and 2012 in particular about voting behavior in relationship to the information we're producing. And some of the basics around this, we start with existing registered voters. So far we don't know if or how this information may influence anybody who's not already getting ready to vote. So we're working with the body of the public that is saying, I'm in the process of voting or has voted to discern some of this information. So just to put that up front. We know we're reaching folks that are generally kind of middle-of-the-road voters, for lack of a better term, so not folks that have all of their sources of information lined out, which you would expect. This is really for people that maybe don't have as much time as the individual that votes in every election and knows exactly where to turn to get information. This is for folks that are, I think, a little bit busier and looking for that one-stop shop, and I think we've seen that in the data as well. We know this hasn't had quite as positive an impact on younger voters. It's still substantial, but in terms of any sort of dip, it's a little bit less with younger voters. But it's still across the political spectrum, across gender diversity, ethnic diversity, party affiliation, all of that. So those are some of the things that we do know. The CIR hasn't been translated, so we don't have data in terms of any CIR content going out to communities where English isn't the first language. So that's a gap in the study. That's also partly reflected by the kind of homogeneous nature of Oregon as well. So that, I don't know if that answers all the question, but those are some of the points we know. And on our website, you can link to studies funded by the NSF and by Kettering in 2010 and 2012, and they are lengthy and thorough, but there's a lot of great research that's going on right now.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Tyrone. Another quick question. The participants, so the 24 people that participated in this process, what has sort of been their feedback? Is this being worthwhile? Is this something that you would recommend to others across North America to try out when you're dealing with a really complex issue? Like how have they responded? Has it made a difference to them? Do they go out and speak about it to others? Any of those types of things?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. It's so we built this on the tradition of the citizen jury method of public deliberation. It's been around for roughly 30 years. And I'd say that our experience has been similar to folks that have run multi-day citizen juries, that the panelists themselves come out extremely empowered. We've seen with every CR that we've run just a wealth of emotion at the end of it, where folks in this process have had this very pure democratic experience and want to carry it home and get further engaged in civic life. The individuals that have gone through this process have also been our lead champions when we go and lobby the legislature as well. So our chief advocates in talking with lawmakers, our chief advocates in testifying at public hearings, and our chief advocates in many, many media news editorial board meetings have been these randomly selected members of the public who come out of this, I think, really pretty profoundly moved, and that's reflected in the statements that we've gathered and the evaluations that have been done. And I should add, too, in Oregon, we now have a statewide commission that oversees our work. That's an official function of the state that's partly comprised of randomly selected members of the public that have gone through this, and they are absolutely, bar none, the champions of this. So I would say, in terms of public process, it's very apparent once you get a couple days into this, I think right around day 3 of a 5-day process, that there's this real shift between where the public started on day 1, which is kind of keeping their opinions closely held and being skeptical, to understanding they're there to perform a public service, to genuine empowerment in fulfilling the objectives of what they're there to do, why they came into the room, which is to inform their fellow voters. And I think they would say the same thing, that by and large it's a profoundly impactful democratic experience that they go through.
Well, Tyrone, thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank both John Lewis and Tyrone Reitman for their presentations. We sincerely hope that everyone that's joined this webinar today has learned a little more just not only about their projects, but also the importance of core values and how the core values can guide people in both designing a process and also, in fact, evaluating a process afterwards. Both Tyrone and John did apply to their respective affiliates and federation for the awards, and we would encourage you to do the same thing. So IAP2 Canada's Core Value Awards application process is now up online on the website, and IAP2 USA Core Value Awards will be up either towards the end of April or the beginning of May. So we really encourage all of you to take the time to apply and become the next Core Value Award winners for your country, so that you can then compete internationally for the international awards as well. They're certainly worthwhile, and it's a good practice, as I said, whether you're beginning your project or you're completing your project, take a look at them and truly see how does your project reflect on that. So on behalf of IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA, we would like to thank you very much for joining our Core Value Awards webinar today. As Drew mentioned earlier on, this information will be available on the websites, both IAP2 USA and IAP2 Canada, within the next 48 hours. So to John and Tyrone, thank you very, very much. And to everybody else, we hope that you have a wonderful day. Take care, everybody.